In a world where the world is at war, again, comes a movie so lifelike it only begs one question. Why is Harry Styles such an asshole?
We know he's getting off.
You can't do that. His friend, she's on our side.
What? What you got?
As soon as he pokes his head out, they'll slaughter him.
Better him than me.
Alright, let's get to the video essay. How do we create emotion in an audience? Why is it scenes like this?
Home.
Or this?
You bow to no one.
Are able to make us tear up. Especially in a movie like Dunkirk, which does not have particularly engaging or well-fleshed-out characters. There is one storytelling concept which I believe to be the cause. That concept is the philosophical or moral conflict. When writing a story, there are three types of conflict to be aware of: the external conflict, internal conflict, and philosophical conflict. In Dunkirk, the external conflict are the German soldiers and pilots who are actively trying to kill the British and French soldiers. If we were to take them out of the movie, the characters may as well be enjoying a spring break beach party. This guy knows what's up. So without the Germans, there would be nothing for the characters to fear. So it's obvious that they need to be there. The internal or relational conflict resides in the characters and between the characters' allies. So Tommy, the main character, comes into conflict with other allied characters. They argue amongst themselves about how to act and what to do next. At sea, Mr. Dawson and his son have to decide whether to turn back to save George after he gets hurt or continue to Dunkirk to rescue more lives. In the air, Farrier, the Spitfire pilot, has a noticeable moment of internal conflict as he decides whether to turn back home to England or continue on to help others at Dunkirk. A character questioning their beliefs is a good example of an internal conflict. But in dramatic stories like Dunkirk, the philosophical conflict is the most important type of conflict. All the characters, plot, and external forces are vehicles for competing philosophical, moral, or ethical ideas. The internal conflict within a character or between allied characters comes from the struggle to choose between competing philosophical ideas or choosing one side in an ethical dilemma. So in essence, the external and internal conflict feed off of the philosophical conflict. When a philosophical conflict is well fleshed out, we as the audience can feel that emotional resonance as we see everything in the plot and characters tying back to this moral question. And at the right moment, this leads to those beautiful tears. So in Dunkirk, I've found that the main philosophical conflict is between saving others versus saving ourselves. Each of the characters displays a different flavor of one of these two ideas through their actions. Some characters who face fear and trauma keep their resolve and save their countrymen, while other characters run from the overwhelming fear and trauma to save themselves. Let's look at each of the three narratives in Dunkirk to understand how writer and director Nolan utilizes and examines this philosophical conflict. We start out with our main character, Tommy, with a couple of fellow British soldiers looking for water, food, cigarettes, and toilet paper. They are looking for the essentials to survive. Then suddenly, shots are fired. All the soldiers start running for cover. They are running to save their lives, and there is no heroic sacrifices. It's just a race for survival. As we see clearly by Tommy's reactions, fear is a major driving subtheme throughout this movie. He is overwhelmed by the fight or flight instinct and he drops his gun and runs. So we see here the flavor of fear leading to panic, which ties into the idea of saving ourselves. This leads into our first look at the competing idea of this philosophical conflict. As we see the French soldiers wave Tommy over, one of the machine gunners begrudgingly tells him, which roughly translates to, "F you English." In this battle, the French soldiers are holding the line. As we know from history, these men were the last defense, bravely sacrificing their lives to buy their British allies enough time to retreat. It is a tough truth that the French were the last men to be evacuated from Dunkirk, if they were able to be evacuated at all. They were heroes for saving others, but understandably some were reluctant to do so, as we see with the French soldiers trying to get on one of the ships, and the British soldier holding them back. Tommy's companion, who turns out to be a French soldier, is also a good example of this. Tommy and the French soldier are hellbent on trying to survive and go as far as to carry a stretcher across a plank of wood, leading them into a series of dire survival situations. Through these characters, we see how the overwhelming fear of death can drive people to go to great lengths to save themselves. Note that a big key to make the philosophical conflict as interesting as possible is that it can't be black and white, for which philosophical idea is right and which is wrong. There have to be reasonable explanations for each competing idea or belief, so the idea of saving others has to be justified, and the idea of saving yourself has to be justified too. Good stories argue both sides of the debate, not just one side. The same goes for a character's decisions in an ethical dilemma. No one decision should be easy to make, and it must be understandable why the character would make that decision. Finally, there must be costs and consequences for choosing one action or the other. And so that is what Dunkirk does. We see all sorts of different actions and dilemmas revolving around saving others versus saving yourself, and the price that is paid to achieve this. As the story continues, we see an ethical dilemma play out as the Army colonel and Navy commander discuss the evacuation of the soldiers. Even in the script, it says that Tommy realizes that it's every man for himself. The colonel and commander discuss how to save the most lives possible.
Colonel, you're going to have to decide how many more wounded to evacuate. One stretcher takes the space of 7 standing men. Excuse me.
To do this, the idea of saving the healthy would be deemed more important, because healthy soldiers can still fight. But of course, by doing this, the injured soldiers may die as a result of lack of medical care, so there is a cost to choosing which lives to save. From this, we can pretend that saving others' lives is not simple or easy to do, and automatically good. Sometimes tough choices like this have to be made. As the Germans start their second bombing run, we see another ethical dilemma with the medical ship sinking.
Keep going down! Cut her loose! What about the wounded?
Cut her loose and push her off! We can't let her sink at the mole!
This spawns a useful life lesson that ties into the philosophical conflict. The idea that duty and responsibility can force you to block out or overcome fear, and therefore save more lives. When it is your duty to lead a group of unnerved people, you have no choice but to take charge and stay calm to keep your comrades in line. You cannot let fear overwhelm your judgment, otherwise many more under your command will die. This is demonstrated with the commander, who makes the tough decision of pushing off the medical ship so that it doesn't sink in the mole. He is thinking about the long-term strategy to save the most lives. But of course, to save the most lives, there is a sacrifice or cost, as men and women on the medical ship must die. And in this reaction shot, we feel the weight of the decision and the heavy toll of doubt it places in him. Oh God, what have I done? A similar sort of philosophical or ethical dilemma is found in the World War II movie The Imitation Game. After Alan Turing and his team successfully break the Enigma machine, they are faced with a difficult decision.
There's going to be an attack on a British passenger convoy. Right there.
God, you're right. Well, those U-boats are only 20, 30 minutes away.
Civilians. Hundreds of them. We can save their lives.
I'll phone Deniston's office so that he can alert the Admiralty.
Here again, the dilemma is of saving some people immediately versus saving many more people in the long run. The issue is that if Alan Turing and his team save the passenger convoy, they will alert the Germans that they've broken their Enigma machine, which is their secret code system. Then the Germans would change this code system, and all of Alan Turing and his team's work would have been undone, leading to more people dying in the long run. But still, real human lives are at stake. Young men who are brothers and sons, friends and allies.
There are 500 civilians in that convoy. Women. Children. We're about to let them die.
Our job is not to save one passenger convoy, it is to win the war.
Our job was to crack Enigma.
But we've done that. Now for the hard part.
So these ethical dilemmas and subsequent difficult decisions further develop this philosophical conflict. It adds an element of character development and empathy to each character, as we can relate to their emotions and difficult decisions. We as the audience can't help but wonder what we do in that situation. Let's talk about the Spitfire Pilots. As mentioned earlier, Ferrier is the only Spitfire pilot left after his two wingmates go down. At this point, Ferrier is on the verge of running out of fuel and has a difficult decision to make. He can continue on to Dunkirk in order to try to save more lives, but risk his life since he will be out of fuel, or he can choose to turn back for home and make sure he and his plane survives to fight another day. While no one would blame him for turning back home, Ferrier decides to carry on. And indeed he ends up getting captured. But heroically, he does in fact save many lives by taking out the Heinkel bomber and then the Stuka dive bomber, and by doing so he demonstrates such resolve, calmness, and courage in the face of fear which Churchill's speech so fiercely and eloquently states at the end of the film. Now let's talk about the seamen. Oh God, I meant the men of the sea. The men of the seamen. Oh damn it.
I've made a huge mistake.
Anyways, we see more ethical dilemmas and ideas on the philosophical conflict with Mr. Dawson, his son, George, and the shivering soldier. The unlikely heroes of the Dunkirk rescue were the civilians in the little boats. In the face of rough waters, wind, and German planes, these men and women sailed across the channel to rescue their boys from a dire fate. We see that saving others requires courage in the face of fear, but we also see how trauma is another subtheme of this movie. The shivering soldier has had the trauma of seeing fellow soldiers and likely friends drown while he's almost been killed. He is understandably persistent in going home to save himself. He is panicked and overwhelmed in the face of fear. Because of this, he wants to save himself. On the other side, we have Mr. Dawson, who is later revealed to have had the trauma of losing a son to the war. Contrary to the shivering soldier, Mr. Dawson has not given in to fear and his trauma, and he goes on to save others with calm and courage. But it isn't easy. As mentioned earlier, when George is bleeding out from head trauma, Mr. Dawson and Peter have to decide whether to turn back to save George or continue on to Dunkirk to potentially save more lives. It makes for a compelling watch, as neither option is the obvious moral choice. So because they try to save more people, the cost is that George dies. But they do end up saving the Spitfire pilot from a certain death, as well as many others in the water. Finally, in one last dilemma, Peter decides to lie to the shivering soldier that George will be okay. Peter realizes how afraid and in pain the shivering soldier already is, and laying shame and blame on someone who is traumatized is not necessary or kind. One last notable dilemma in the narrative with asshole Harry Styles is where he and his regiment of soldiers, Tommy, and the French soldier wait in the beached boat as it begins filling with seawater. The dilemma comes in the form of who should leave the boat to keep them afloat. The cost of the decision is that the person who leaves will likely die from the German soldiers firing at their boat.
We know who's getting off.
You can't do that. He's French. He's on our side.
Go on. Let you go.
As soon as he pokes his head out, they'll slaughter him.
Better him than me.
It's not fair.
Survival's not fair.
This scene demonstrates how fear and panic can make us act as assholes like Harry Styles. Harry Styles nominates the French soldier. Tommy argues against this, bringing up several good points about fairness and how they wouldn't be alive without the French soldier saving them from the torpedo attack.
He saved our lives.
And he's about to do it again.
I'll live with it. It's wrong.
Go on.
One man's not going to make enough difference.
Harry Styles and his fellow soldiers do not care, though. The fear and panic pushes them to pursue survival in any way possible, even at the expense of this young man. But can we blame them? Under that stress, who knows? Perhaps we would do the same thing too. That intense desire to survive is known to be overwhelm and overpower our morality. We can look at psychological studies like the Stanford Prison Experiment, or concepts like crowd psychology for other examples of how people turn into assholes. So this ethical dilemma, like the others, adds to the intrigue and engagement of this movie. It really helps make the movie memorable and thought-provoking, which is what the best stories tend to do. Finally, at the end of the film, we see how Harry Styles' character has developed shame for his assholeness, and how he believes that their retreat was shameful. It's this moment where we reach the philosophical climax. We're uncertain whether we should be ashamed or happy about their surviving and retreating. Is their retreat and survival truly shameful? Should they have all fought to the death? We see that the answers to those questions are no. Tommy and Harry Styles are rewarded with beers and applause, and we hear the accompanying uplifting music and words from Churchill. We see that sometimes retreat can be a victory. They have survived to fight another day, and that in itself is heroic. In essence, Churchill's words are the final iteration on this idea of how to save ourselves and others. We must not give in to fear. We must keep fighting at all costs. His words are definitive statements, and his words demonstrate what a great leader does by taking charge and keeping calm to keep his country in hope and courage. And that is the essence of the Dunkirk spirit. Now shed those beautiful tears. Thank you for watching. If you're looking for another story with more emotional moments and interesting philosophical conflicts like Dunkirk, check out my World War II novel on Amazon now. Link in the description below. I do apologize to Harry Styles for repeatedly calling him an ass. Without a doubt, his performance truly was